Here are 5 keynotes for the script on the title: How to Increase Motivation and Drive, written in the scientific, yet practical style you're asking for without mentioning Dr. Huberman directly. Motivation and drive are not abstract forces, but biological processes governed by neurochemicals like dopamine. By understanding how the brain regulates effort, reward, and pursuit, you can learn to harness these systems more effectively. Motivation increases when you experience progress. Breaking down large goals into smaller, achievable steps creates a loop of reward and pursuit that reinforces consistency and effort. External triggers shape your internal drive. Optimizing your environment by removing distractions, creating cues for focus, and aligning tasks with your peak energy times can dramatically boost motivation. Motivation grows when you lean in to controlled stress. Reframing challenges as opportunities and using physiological tools like controlled breathing, movement, or exposure to mild discomfort can transform stress into a driver of action. Sustained drive comes from linking daily effort to a larger purpose. Clarifying your why allows the brain to assign more value to hard work, reinforcing resilience and persistence when obstacles arise. When people talk about motivation, they often describe it as if it were an abstract energy that some days appears and other days vanishes without explanation. But motivation is not a mysterious force. It is deeply rooted in biology. At its core, motivation is about how the brain and body organize themselves to pursue goals, sustain effort, and overcome obstacles. The central player in this process is the neuromodulator dopamine. Dopamine is often misunderstood as the molecule of pleasure or reward. In reality, dopamine is about anticipation, pursuit, and craving. It acts as the chemical signal that drives you to move towards something, not simply to enjoy having it. This is why understanding the biology of motivation is so crucial. Once you recognize that motivation is not random, but instead the result of systems in the brain that can be tuned, you realize you can play an active role in increasing it. Dopamine is released from specific brain areas, particularly the ventral tegmental area and the substantia nigra. And it projects to regions like the nucleus accumbens and prefrontal cortex. These circuits are designed to evaluate potential rewards, calculate the effort required to get them, and then mobilize the body into action. One of the most important aspects of dopamine is that it operates on a dynamic baseline. This means that your brain maintains a certain resting level of dopamine, and above that baseline, spikes occur when you anticipate or achieve something valuable. After the spike, dopamine levels return back toward baseline, sometimes even dipping below it, which can leave you feeling temporarily less motivated. This biological seesaw is why motivation often feels like it comes in waves. Understanding this system gives you the ability to work with it instead of against it. For example, if you chase constant external rewards, such as checking your phone every few minutes for notifications or relying on social media likes, you are artificially spiking dopamine too frequently. Over time, this lowers your baseline, making it harder to feel motivated by meaningful pursuits. By contrast, if you learn to space out dopamine rewards and attach dopamine release to the effort process itself, you create a more sustainable system of motivation. This is why celebrating small steps along the way is so powerful. Each step achieved provides a modest dopamine pulse, which not only reinforces that behavior, but also keeps baseline levels. Another critical factor in the biology of motivation is the interaction between dopamine and stress hormones like adrenaline. When you are faced with a challenge, adrenaline levels rise, sharpening focus and preparing the body for action. However, if adrenaline remains too high for too long, you feel anxious or exhausted. Dopamine counterbalances this by providing a sense of drive and possibility, transforming stress into forward action. This explains why people who reframe stress as a sign that they are about to grow or achieve something can use it to propel themselves rather than be paralyzed by it. Their brains are literally assigning a different meaning to the same physiological state. Sleep, nutrition, and light exposure also play a massive role in the biology of motivation because they affect dopamine production and receptor sensitivity. A well-rested brain has more capacity to release and respond to dopamine. Exposure to natural sunlight, especially in the morning, sets off a cascade of neurochemical events that support dopamine release later in the proper nutrition, particularly ensuring adequate intake of amino acids like tyrosine, which is a building block for dopamine, also directly supports your motivation systems. In other words, the foundation for motivation starts with behaviors that optimize your brain's biology long before you even think about tackling a goal. Importantly, motivation is not simply about getting a reward. It is about the willingness to endure effort to achieve that reward. So the brain regions influenced by dopamine literally alter your perception of effort. On days when your dopamine system is functioning well, effort feels energizing, even exciting. On days when dopamine levels are low, the same effort feels like a burden. This subjective experience of effort is not fixed. It can be trained by progressively leaning into effort and learning to associate it with growth. You can recalibrate your brain to value the process, not just the outcome. One of the most fascinating discoveries in neuroscience is that dopamine is not only released when you succeed, but also when you anticipate success. If you envision your goals vividly and attach emotional value to them, your brain releases dopamine in advance, which fuels the behaviors required to reach them. This means that visualization, when paired with action, is not just a mental trick, but a biological tool to increase drive. The catch is that visualization must be tied to effort. Simply imagining success without engaging in the pursuit does not sustain dopamine. It actually depletes it over time because the brain registers an unmet expectation. Social context also modulates dopamine release. Working with others toward a shared goal or receiving acknowledgement for your progress can enhance dopamine signaling. This explains why accountability partners, group challenges, or team efforts often increase motivation beyond what you can generate alone. The brain evolved to be social, and dopamine systems are wired to respond to collective pursuit as strongly as individual achievement. To harness the biology of motivation, you must learn to respect the balance between baseline and spikes. You want to avoid constant artificial highs that erode your baseline while at the same time strategically creating meaningful spikes through progress, visualization, and aligned effort. You also want to optimize the physiological foundations, sleep, light, nutrition, stress regulation, so that your brain's chemistry supports drive rather than undermines it. When you work with these systems rather than fight them, motivation becomes less about waiting for inspiration and more about creating the conditions where drive naturally emerges. Motivation is not a constant state, but something that grows through action. And one of the most powerful ways to increase it is by breaking down large goals into small. This approach is not just about psychological satisfaction. It is deeply rooted in the way the brain responds to progress. Each time you complete even a minor task that moves you closer to a larger objective, your brain releases a small but meaningful amount of dopamine. That release reinforces the behavior, essentially teaching your nervous system that effort leads to reward. Over time, this builds momentum, creating a cycle where progress fuels motivation. When people set enormous goals without smaller checkpoints, they often find themselves overwhelmed. The brain struggles to maintain motivation because the distance between effort and reward is too great. Neurochemically, if the brain cannot predict that reward will arrive soon, dopamine signaling weakens, and with it, the willingness to pursue action decreases. This is why massive ambitions, like writing a book, building a business, or transforming physical health, require breaking down the process into manageable units. Completing those units provides evidence to your brain that progress is being made, which keeps dopamine release active and sustainable. The concept of small wins also taps into how humans perceive effort. Large, undefined goals create a sense of endless effort without clear payoff, which feels draining. Small wins, by contrast, make effort tangible and rewarding. Every completed step feels like closing a loop in your nervous system, reinforcing the idea that your actions have impact. This process shifts motivation from being purely abstract to being grounded in real-world feedback. The accumulation of these experiences builds a sense of self-efficacy. Control outcomes through your own behavior, which is one of the strongest predictors of long-term drive. Consider the process of training for a marathon. If you focus only on running the full 26 miles, the task seems daunting and overwhelming. But if you break it down into running a mile consistently, then 5, then 10, each milestone becomes a victory that fuels the next one. With each completed distance, your brain releases dopamine in response to the achievement, reinforcing the connection between effort and success. By the time you reach the larger goal, you have built not just physical endurance, but a motivational architecture that supports the pursuit of challenges far beyond the original target. The key lies in how you frame and acknowledge these small wins. Simply going through the motions without recognizing the progress can blunt the dopamine effect. The brain requires that you consciously register achievement for the reinforcement loop to activate. This is why practices such as journaling progress, celebrating milestones, or even mentally acknowledging small steps are powerful tools. They amplify the dopamine release associated with progress and strengthen the motivational cycle. Small wins also help recalibrate your perception of setbacks. When pursuing a large goal, obstacles and failures are inevitable. If you only evaluate success based on the final outcome, setbacks feel catastrophic. But when you have structured the journey around smaller achievements, a setback in one area does not erase the entire sense of progress. Instead, it becomes a temporary disruption in a broader trajectory of wins. This mindset protects against discouragement and preserves the motivation needed to keep moving forward. Another important aspect of leveraging small wins is that it teaches the brain to value the process itself, not just the outcome. Motivation is strongest when you can attach dopamine release to the act of pursuing rather than the act of arriving. If every step you take becomes an opportunity for reward, the entire journey becomes a source of energy rather than just the final destination. This shift transforms effort from being something to endure into something that feels intrinsically valuable. Over time, this creates resilience, as you are less dependent on external validation or the distant promise of success to maintain drive. Small wins also interact with attention and focus. When a task is broken down into a manageable piece, the brain can engage more deeply with it. Attention sharpens because the effort is clearly defined and completion feels attainable. This creates a positive feedback loop. Focused attention increases the likelihood of success. Success generates dopamine, and dopamine reinforces focus for the next step. In this way, small wins not only build motivation, but also enhance the quality of the work itself. It is also worth noting that small wins compound. Just like compound interest grows wealth over time, small daily or weekly achievements accumulate into substantial progress. At first, the gains might feel modest, but as momentum builds, the trajectory becomes exponential. The brain begins to expect success as a result of effort, and this expectation alone primes the dopamine system to fire more readily. This creates a self-reinforcing cycle where motivation grows stronger with each completed action. The practice of leveraging small wins can extend to every domain of life. In relationships, consistent small actions, such as expressing gratitude or listening attentively, build trust and strengthen bonds. In work, completing small components of a larger project keeps motivation alive, even during long timelines. In health, small behavioral shifts like improving sleep by 15 minutes a night or adding one healthy meal per day accumulate into lasting changes that once seemed impossible. Each domain benefits from the same biological principle. The brain thrives on progress, no matter how small, and progress generates motivation to keep moving forward. Motivation is not generated in isolation. It is continuously influenced by the environment in which you operate. The brain is highly sensitive to external cues, and these cues can either enhance or diminish your drive to take action. In many ways, the environment acts as the stage upon which the biology of motivation plays out. If the stage is cluttered, noisy, or filled with distractions, the brain struggles to sustain focus and effort. If the stage is optimized with clear signals for action and minimal interference, the brain finds it easier to initiate and maintain motivated behavior. Understanding and intentionally shaping your environment, therefore, becomes one of the most powerful levers for increasing motivation and drive. At the core of this concept is the relationship between cues and behavior. Cues are signals that trigger the brain to initiate certain actions. These can be visual, auditory, or even contextual. For example, seeing your running shoes by the door is a cue that primes the brain for exercise. Opening a browser tab with social media before beginning work is a cue that primes distraction. The nervous system does not distinguish between cues that help you or harm you. It simply follows the associations that have been built over time. This means that motivation can be engineered by deliberately designing cues that lead to desired behaviors while removing cues that prompt unwanted ones. Light is one of the most powerful environmental cues. Natural sunlight in the morning tells the brain that it is time to be alert and active. It triggers the release of cortisol in healthy levels, which promotes wakefulness and sets off a timer for melatonin release later in the day to help with sleep. This simple exposure calibrates your entire circadian rhythm, which in turn optimizes dopamine and other neuromodulators that regulate motivation. Without sufficient light in the morning, the brain's internal clock drifts, making it harder to feel drive at the right time. By simply stepping outside early in the day, you anchor your biology to support higher energy and motivation throughout the day. Physical organization of your environment also directly affects drive. When your workspace is cluttered, the brain is forced to constantly filter irrelevant information, which taxes cognitive resources and diminishes focus. A clean, orderly space sends a signal of readiness and clarity, which primes the brain for productive behavior. This is why even small acts like tidying a desk can create a disproportionate sense of motivation. The brain interprets the order in the external world as a cue for order in the internal world, and this reduces friction when engaging in tasks that require effort. Another key aspect of controlling your environment is aligning it with your natural energy rhythms. Every individual has periods of peak alertness and dips in energy throughout the day. By observing when you naturally feel most focused and scheduling important work during those windows, you align external structure with internal biology. Attempting to do high-focus work when your body is wired for rest creates unnecessary resistance and drains motivation. Environment is not only about physical surroundings, but also about the timing and structure you impose on your day. Distraction is perhaps the greatest environmental enemy of motivation. The human brain did not evolve to handle the constant influx of notifications, alerts, and digital stimuli that dominate modern life. Each notification is a cue that hijacks your dopamine system, pulling attention toward novelty rather than sustained effort. Over time, this conditions the brain to crave constant stimulation and undermines the ability to stay motivated toward long-term goals. Controlling your environment means deliberately turning off unnecessary notifications, creating device-free zones, and batching digital interactions into specific windows of time. By doing so, you reduce the number of competing cues and allow motivation to concentrate on what truly matters. Environmental control also extends to social factors. The people around you act as cues, consciously and unconsciously, shaping your levels of drive. Being in the presence of individuals who embody focus, discipline, and motivation primes you to adopt similar behaviors. Conversely, being surrounded by apathy or negativity dampens your own motivational circuits. This is not simply psychological. The brain is wired with mirror neurons that respond to the actions and emotions of others. Aligning yourself with environments where motivated behavior is the norm creates a powerful feedback loop that sustains drive. One strategy that enhances motivation is to create friction for undesirable behaviors while reducing friction for desirable ones. If you want to read more, place books in visible, easily accessible locations. If you want to exercise, prepare your workout clothes and equipment in advance. At the same time, make unwanted behaviors harder to engage in. Remove junk food from the house if you want to eat better, or log out of distracting apps so that accessing them requires more effort. The brain tends to follow the path of least resistance. By reshaping the environment, you tilt the odds in favor of actions that support your goals. Rituals and routines are another way to embed cues into your environment. When you perform the same action in the same context repeatedly, the brain begins to associate the environment with the behavior. Over time, the environment itself triggers motivation without requiring conscious thought. This is why professional athletes or performers often at pre-game or pre-performance routines. The ritual itself is a cue that primes the nervous system for focus and drive. Anyone can harness this principle by building consistent routines in their daily life, turning motivation into something automatic rather than something you must constantly summon. Ultimately, controlling your environment and cues is about reducing the friction between intention and action. When your surroundings are aligned with your goals, the brain's motivational systems engage with less resistance. When they are misaligned, every action requires additional effort, which depletes motivation more quickly. By designing your environment deliberately through light, organization, timing, social context, and cues, you create conditions where drive is not left to chance, but becomes a natural response to the world you have constructed around you. Stress is often spoken about as something to avoid, something purely negative that undermines health and performance. While it is true that chronic, unregulated stress can be harmful, the reality is that stress in controlled amounts is one of the most powerful drivers of growth and motivation. The biological systems that govern stress are the same systems that prime the body for action, sharpen attention, and prepare the brain to learn. When harnessed correctly, stress and discomfort can act as catalysts, transforming reluctance into drive and fear into fuel. The key lies in how stress is framed and how the body and mind are conditioned to respond to it. At a physiological level, stress activates the sympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system. This triggers the release of adrenaline and noradrenaline, which increase heart rate, dilate pupils, and sharpen focus. Cortisol, another stress hormone, is released slightly later to mobilize energy and sustain alertness. These biological changes are not arbitrary. They are designed to prepare the body for effort. In evolutionary terms, stress ensured survival by mobilizing resources to either confront or escape challenges. In modern life, however, many people interpret these same physiological signals, an elevated heart rate, shallow breathing, increased alertness, as signs of weakness or impending failure. That interpretation can undermine motivation and lead to avoidance. But when you understand that these responses are actually signals of readiness, stress transforms from something to fear into something to utilize. Discomfort, whether physical or psychological, is one of the most direct ways to engage the motivational systems of the brain. When you voluntarily enter situations that are uncomfortable but not harmful, you activate dopamine pathways in response to overcoming the challenge. The contrast between discomfort and relief generates a potent sense of reward, teaching the brain that effort is valuable. This is why practices such as exercise, cold exposure, or even difficult mental tasks can increase drive. They provide controlled doses of stress that strengthen resilience and recalibrate the nervous system to view challenge as an opportunity. One powerful way to reframe stress is to recognize the overlap between the physiological state of stress and the physiological state of excitement. Both involve heightened arousal, increased adrenaline, and greater alertness. The difference lies largely in if you tell yourself that the sensations of stress, rapid heartbeat, sweating, butterflies in the stomach, are signals that you are prepared for something meaningful, the brain shifts into a performance-oriented state. This mental reframing transforms the same biology that once triggered avoidance into biology that fuels action. Breathing is another tool that can transform that. Keen fuel. Rapid, shallow breaths amplify the sympathetic response and heighten stress, but deliberate control of breathing can restore balance. For example, taking a long exhale relative to the inhale engages the parasympathetic system, reducing excessive arousal while maintaining alertness. Conversely, short, sharp inhales can heighten readiness when energy is low. By learning to regulate breathing, you gain direct influence over the stress response, ensuring that it remains in the optimal zone for motivation and performance rather than spilling over into anxiety or fatigue. Stress also has a unique relationship with neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire and adapt. When stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol are released in moderate amounts, they increase the brain's receptivity to learning. This means that moments of challenge and discomfort are some of the most powerful opportunities to reinforce new behaviors and build resilience. If you push through difficulty while remaining focused, the brain encodes that effort deeply, making it easier to engage in the same behavior in the future. In this way, stress is not just a temporary state, but a biological tool for rewiring motivation at the neural level. Exposure to discomfort can also recalibrate the baseline of what feels tolerable. For example, when you regularly practice cold exposure or high-intensity exercise, your nervous system adapts to handle those stressors with greater efficiency. As a result, everyday stressors, traffic, deadlines, interpersonal challenges, feel less overwhelming. By voluntarily stepping into controlled discomfort, you expand your capacity to handle life's inevitable challenges, reducing avoidance behaviors, and strengthening your drive to take on more. It is also important to understand the concept of recovery in relation to stress. Just as muscles grow stronger through cycles of stress and rest, motivation grows when stress is applied in manageable doses, followed by adequate recovery. Too little stress leads to stagnation and apathy. Too much without recovery leads to burnout. The optimal strategy is to intentionally dose stress through challenging tasks, deliberate practice, or exposure to discomfort, and then allow the nervous system to reset through sleep, relaxation, and restoration. This balance ensures that stress continues to act as a motivator rather than a Stress can also be a powerful signal of alignment. When you feel stress in response to a task, it is often because the task carries. The nervous system does not mobilize energy for things that are irrelevant. It saves its strongest responses for challenges that matter to survival, growth, or long-term goals. By noticing where stress shows up, you can identify areas of life that are deeply significant to you. Instead of viewing that stress as an obstacle, you can interpret it as confirmation that you are engaging with something meaningful enough to trigger the full mobilization of your biology. Social context plays a role as well. Facing stress in a supportive group or with a sense of shared purpose can amplify motivation and resilience. The same stressor that feels overwhelming alone can feel energizing in a collective setting. This is because social support activates oxytocin, a hormone that buffers the negative effects of stress while maintaining its motivational benefits. By embedding yourself in environments where challenges are faced collectively, you can convert stress into shared drive rather than individual burden. The deliberate use of stress and discomfort is ultimately about transforming what the body and brain already do naturally into a source of power rather than paralysis. By reframing stress as readiness, practicing controlled exposure to discomfort, using tools like breath to regulate arousal, and balancing challenge with recovery, you can rewire your relationship to difficulty. Instead of avoiding stress, you learn to engage with it, using it as the spark that ignites motivation and sustains drive through the ups and downs of meaningful pursuits. Motivation is strongest and most sustainable when effort is connected to something larger than the immediate task at hand. The human brain is wired not only to seek short-term rewards, but also to assign value to actions that serve a greater purpose. When daily behaviors are aligned with a long-term vision, every effort begins to carry meaning that extends beyond the moment. This linkage between the present and the future is what allows people to endure difficulty, persist through obstacles, and maintain drive even when external rewards are delayed or uncertain. Without this connection, effort feels arbitrary and motivation quickly fades. At the biological level, dopamine is released not just in response to immediate achievements, but also when the brain perceives that a given action is moving you toward a meaningful goal. This means that defining a long-term vision and regularly reminding yourself of it can increase the motivational power of even the smallest tasks. For example, if your vision is to become physically stronger and healthier, the act of completing a single workout carries more significance than just the calories burned or the weights lifted. Your brain links that effort to the larger vision, and the dopamine release reinforces the behavior with far greater strength than if the effort were isolated. Clarity of vision is essential. The nervous system cannot assign value to vague or poorly defined outcomes. If the vision is ambiguous, such as wanting to be successful or be happy, the motivational circuits struggle to engage because the brain cannot accurately measure progress towards something so undefined. But when the vision is specific and emotionally charged, such as building a career that allows freedom and creativity, or creating a healthier lifestyle to be present for family, it activates the systems that generate sustained drive. The brain functions like a prediction machine. It thrives when it can chart a path between current effort and future reward. A clear vision provides the roadmap that allows the system to operate effectively. Linking effort to long-term vision also transforms the way setbacks are experienced. When motivation is tied only to immediate outcomes, failure can feel catastrophic. A missed workout, a lost sale, or a failed project might appear as a complete derailment. But when those same actions are framed as part of a broader journey, setbacks lose their power to extinguish. They become temporary fluctuations in a much longer process. The long-term vision provides a buffer against discouragement, allowing you to see challenges not as dead ends, but as adjustments along the way. This perspective sustains motivation through the inevitable difficulties that arise when pursuing meaningful goals. The role of identity is deeply intertwined with long-term vision. When effort is tied to who you want to become, motivation shifts from being extrinsic to intrinsic. Instead of working out just to lose weight, you frame the effort as embodying the identity of a disciplined, resilient person. Instead of writing just to finish a project, you frame it as becoming a creator who consistently shares ideas. The brain responds strongly to identity-based goals because they connect action to self-concept. And self-concept is one of the most powerful drivers of behavior. Aligning effort with a vision of who you want to be transforms tasks from obligations into affirmations of identity, which creates durable motivation. Another important factor is the narrative you create around your vision. Humans are storytelling beings, and the brain interprets life events through the lens of narrative. When your vision is cast as a story in which you are the protagonist, effort becomes part of a meaningful plot. The struggles are no longer random hardships. The story you tell yourself about why you are pursuing something is as important as the pursuit itself. Long-term vision also provides a framework for prioritization. In a world filled with constant demands on attention and energy, it is easy to become reactive, spending effort on tasks that feel urgent but are not aligned with what truly matters. A clearly defined vision serves as a filter, allowing you to evaluate whether a given action moves you closer to or further from your ultimate goals. This filtering process conserves motivation for what is meaningful and prevents depletion from distractions that offer little long-term value. Over time, this alignment creates consistency, and consistency is what transforms motivation from a fleeting state into a reliable trait. It is also important to revisit and refine your vision regularly. Motivation thrives on novelty, and the brain needs reinforcement that the vision is still relevant and emotionally compelling. Reflecting on your progress, adjusting the vision as you evolve, and reconnecting with the deeper reasons behind your goals ensures that the motivational systems remain engaged. A vision is not static, it grows as you grow. By treating it as a living framework rather than a fixed endpoint, you keep motivation fresh and adaptable. Effort aligned with long-term vision creates a unique form of resilience. When the vision is strong enough, effort is no longer something that needs to be negotiated with daily. It becomes automatic because the brain has fully integrated the connection between action and purpose. In this state, even difficult or tedious tasks feel less like chores and more like steps in a meaningful journey. The discomfort is reframed as proof of commitment, and the brain rewards that commitment with dopamine, creating a self-sustaining cycle of motivation. This alignment also creates what psychologists call a meaning-based motivation. Unlike reward-based motivation, which depends on external outcomes, meaning-based motivation draws from internal conviction. This form of drive does not waver as much with changing circumstances because it is anchored in deeply held value. When you align effort with vision, you tap into this more durable form of motivation, one that persists even when external recognition or immediate rewards are absent. It is this kind of motivation that allows people to dedicate years, sometimes decades, to pursuits that ultimately reshape their lives and the lives of others. Motivation and drive are not random states of mind, but deeply rooted biological processes that can be understood, harnessed, and strengthened. By learning how the brain regulates effort through dopamine, you gain clarity on why motivation rises and falls and how to stabilize it over time. Small wins provide the necessary pulses of progress that build momentum, making even the largest goals achievable step by step. The environment and the cues you allow into your daily life shape the very foundation of motivation, either reinforcing your drive or quietly eroding it. Stress and discomfort, often misunderstood as obstacles, can instead serve as powerful tools when reframed and deliberately used, transforming physiological readiness into fuel for action. And above all, aligning effort with a long-term vision ensures that every task, every challenge, and every setback is infused with meaning, connecting present actions to a purpose that sustains motivation far beyond the moment. Together, these principles reveal that drive is not something you passively wait for. It is something you actively create, nurture, and direct toward the life you choose to build.